Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 15 of the TechForge podcast. I am your host for this evening, Dynamo Ned, joined as always by Jason and Hunter as my co-hosts. All right. Okay. So before we jump into the tech news, anything new or interesting happening with you all?
I got a month-long project done yesterday, and I'm happy about that.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Indeed.
And then there was an issue with the software today that I was talking to y'all about.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And one resolution monitor.
Yeah, I was really racking my brain over that one, man. I couldn't think of anything else to suggest.
Yeah, I looked into it on some of the Adobe forums, and apparently that's a long-standing issue with that particular piece of software.
Yeah, and ironically, they knew about it for a long time. And it was like, okay, it's a known issue now. Like, thanks.
8 months later?
Appreciate it. Yep.
Yeah, there were at least a half dozen threads I found on there where it was like, thank you, this will be added to our bug log.
Yeah.
And that was the only response.
And they never fixed it.
Yeah, it's too bad. Those are always annoying. It's affecting a huge number of their user base, or at least a decent number. And, sorry guys.
Well, that
reminds
me of another thing where there was an update to another program, and the way the process was didn't work for uploading a certain file to the database.
Mm-hmm.
And I got the call, and I called the manufacturer, and the manufacturer said, "Nope, we're not going to fix it." Like, but we need you to fix it. No, we're not going to.
Gotta love that.
Awesome. Yeah.
That's when you say, in that case, we're no longer using your product.
Yeah, that would be great to say, but that currently would not work.
Oh, I know. But that's what you want to say.
Yes.
Yeah, but then you got to put that customer filter on, that customer service filter on, unfortunately.
Oh, don't get me started.
It's also like when Microsoft decides to update Outlook and somebody says, "I can't do this thing anymore. It doesn't work." Yeah, Microsoft updated stuff. You need to fix it. You need to get it back the way I did it last week or 2 weeks ago. Can't do that. No, you need to fix it. There's no way I have access to Microsoft's code to do anything with it. Plus, I don't know how to program, so I can't.
Yeah. Can you imagine being in IT and answering customer service calls when Microsoft went from using the standard menu tabs and going over to the ribbons? Oh my gosh, that must have been a customer service nightmare.
Yeah.
That's why I predominantly use a completely different Office suite now, because it uses more of that traditional drop-down menu system, like you have file edit and all that stuff.
Yeah.
I can't use the ribbons, man. I can for work, but yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, I ran into a situation this week in my job doing tech support where a user called in and they were wanting something that the particular piece of software I provide support for doesn't do. I tried to explain to them multiple times that the software does not do that. Right. And they refused to believe that it would do that. And they started getting belligerent, and they started, calling me some things that I can't say on this podcast.
Okay.
At which point I said, "Ma'am, I'm not really liking your tone. Can we please avoid the swears?" At which point she told me to do things that are anatomically impossible and hung up.
Yep.
Wow, that's that's borderline more than rude.
Well,
Sorry, man.
I usually get at least one or two of those, if not a day, a week. So it's you get used to it, but at the same time, they make just terrible stories.
I hear you.
You know, you try to put on the customer service face, and you try to be as diplomatic as possible, but eventually there comes a point where you're just like, can you please stop doing that?
Pretty please, thank you. Yeah, my hat's off. My hat's off to you, customer service facing people, man. Tough gig sometimes. Tough gig, but it's rewarding. You guys help people.
Yeah, it is. Even though it's annoying some days and frustrating some days, it's still a good build.
Yeah, and some days it can be rather thankless, but you know, when you do get the one person you're able to help and walk them through and, you know, get them to actually use something for the first time, it makes it worth it.
Yeah, and they're extremely grateful.
Yeah, I've had
that's a nice uplifter, actually. I remember those days. Well, I've got lots of additional time coming, so I'll be kicking out a bunch of videos pretty soon.
Good.
So
good to hear.
Not to go into too much detail.
All right. Well, enough time reminiscing. Let's get down to the tech news.
Yes, sir.
I'll just go ahead and tell our audience up front. This week, a lot of the articles are AMD related, simply because there's just not that much of huge import right now in the tech news or the tech world. It's kind of in a holding pattern. We had the big news with the RTX launch last week, and now we're kind of in a holding pattern until the next big launch, which, based on some of the information in this week's tech news, could be sooner than we think.
2070?
That is our first story for the evening. The GeForce RTX 2070 got a release date this week. October the 17th. This is coming from a non-tech, but there were lots of different sources for this out there.
So, where are the differences?
So the RTX 2070, compared to the RTX 2080, it has 2,304 CUDA cores, backed by 64 ROPS, a core clock of 1410 megahertz, with a boost clock of 1710 megahertz for the Founders Edition, and 1620 megahertz for the regular spec, and features 8 gigs of GDDR6 versus the GTX 1080s and 1080 Ti's 11. And so it's based on the Turing process or the Turing architecture, but it is significantly smaller than the 2080. Basically, as far as we can tell, this is going to be the first time that the 2070 gets its own separate chip instead of being a cut-down version of the high-end chip. You know, with the 970 and the 980, or excuse me, the 970 and the 1070, they were both cut-down versions of the 80 series card from their respective generations. Right. This time, though, the RTX 2070 is getting its own GPU, whereas the 2080 and the 2080 Ti are using variants on the TU104 GPU die. The 2070 is going to be using the TU106. Now, if this sets off alarm bells in some of the longtime enthusiast heads, that's because the 106 die has traditionally been the die used for the 60 series. Like the 960 was GP106. or excuse me, GM 106. The 1060 was GP 106.
Right. It's interesting. I wonder why they're doing that.
So there's some speculation that the RTX 2070, is kind of being separated out from the 2080 and the 2080 Ti for segmentation reasons. But, and that would make sense. But if they're really going to move up the 106 die to the 70 series, it makes you wonder what they're going to do for the rest of the lineup, or even if there's going to be a rest of the lineup.
That's true. I wonder how it compares to the 1070 Ti, to be honest.
I would bet the 2070 has roughly 1080 equivalent performance, which the 2070 Ti or the 1070 Ti basically did too. And I think it's all going to come down to, in that segment, which one has the best price. Just my opinion. I know right now I can go onto Craigslist in my area and I can find 1070 Ti's for right around $300 to $325.
Which, yeah, that is probably a little less than what you can find at new.
New, they're about $450, but if the 2070 is going to be $499, which, remember, $499 is for the baseline cards, the Founders Editions are going to be $599. And remember, they clock higher.
True. Well, you say that, and I've noticed the 1070 Ti does boost up to 1911. And so did the GTX 1060, although I've not done any overclocking of the 1070 Ti yet. The 1060 that I had could overclock to 2050 megahertz, I think. So I wonder how many T-flops. Okay, so the 2070 or the 1070 Ti is 8.1 teraflops. But in the article, the RTX 2070 is 7.5. So yeah, that would 7.5 to 7.9. So yeah.
So
just trying to get an idea for what it will benchmark at. I think you're right.
For comparison, the GTX 1070, when it launched with an MSRP of $379. The 2070 is launching with an MSRP of $499. So and at that price, you're in the same territory as a GTX 1080.
Yep, and that's going to be the aftermarket cards. The actual Founders Editions are supposed to launch $100 over that.
Mm-hmm.
The other difference between the 70 and 1070 Ti is the cores. 1070 Ti has 2,432 cores, and this is for the Founders Edition. The 1070 has 1920.
Yeah, and 400 extra CUDA cores. It's always a crapshoot when you try to compare CUDA cores across architectures.
Yeah, because you're going to want to say that the newer architecture is going to outperform the outgoing architecture from a core by core basis. So that's kind of rough to guesstimate.
Right. And if the other Turing cards are anything to go by, the RTX 2080 was roughly 25 to 30% faster than the 1080 and roughly the same speed as the 1080 Ti.
Right.
Meanwhile, the RTX 2080 Ti was between 25 and 35% faster than the 1080 Ti. The problem being, right now it also costs 70% more.
Yeah. I wonder.
And so I think, if we see roughly a 30% increase in performance over the 1070, that's going to put it roughly in overclocked GTX 1080 territory.
Yep.
And so I think NVIDIA's biggest problem here is the biggest competition for RTX is their own 10 series graphics cards, which right now are significantly cheaper.
For now. Yes. Yeah, and they're still selling pretty well from what I understand, so they're still very relevant, folks.
Mm-hmm.
Still very relevant.
Yes, and like I'm saying, let's see. I mean, I was looking at admittedly a mini ITX version of a 1070 that someone in my area was selling for $240.
It's a very solid card, Mr. Ned. Very solid.
And when I look at, okay, I can pay $240 for a GTX 1070, or I could pay twice that amount for an RTX 2070 and get roughly GTX 1080 performance, is what most people are guessing.
Right. So
I guess the question is, for most people, is that extra 30 to 40% performance increase worth the 50% or more in markup?
Well, I want to say the current suggestion is no. There's no software out there to support the new features.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the big problem, is that RTX right now is vaporware.
So they've got two double whammies, and people are not happy about it. I mean, they're priced really high for what you get, and there's no software to support the line's base features, which is what, DLSS and ray tracing. Both amazing features, both great technology, but you're paying for it, and it's not out yet. So, and they're competing against a mature product stack, which is still extremely relevant and is getting cheaper by the day. So pick them up while you can. They're not going to be around for forever.
That's true as well, but it may be around longer than we think. Remember, NVIDIA got stuck with a glut of GPUs when they overbuilt during the cryptocurrency mining craze.
Sure.
And so they wound up shipping, I think it was, close to 100 million GPUs to their various AIBs to get rid of them?
Yeah. Here you go, guys. It's a bunch of GPUs. So it seems like a decent market for the 1070 right now, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
And the 1080s are going down too, to like $429, which is the same price as a 1070 was.
Yep. It was not that long ago that you were paying $500 plus for a 1070.
Yeah.
And so...
And there's some 1080s and some 1070s, at least one of each I've seen for $399. The Zotac 1070, either regular card or mini, is let me see,
Yeah, the 1070 Ti Mini is like $400.
Yeah.
That's an extremely solid part, by the way.
Okay. And the 1080, what at the 1080? Oh, the PNY. PNY lower style was $400. Which is, well, would say blower style is good for if you have a small, if you have a mini ITX case and space is limited, or you just want to take the cooler off and water cool it. Because then you're not kind of wasting a big 2 or 3 fan cooler.
Well, not only that, but you kind of hit it right on the head there, Mr. Hunter. You go with the blower style card, non-RTX, and you've got reference PCB, which gives you good water cooling block compatibility. So, yeah, it's not bad either, especially if you want to go that route.
Especially because the K1 have style.
Jason, do you have a really loud mouse wheel or something? Because there's something coming through. There's something really loud coming through your mic.
I was wondering how long it would take. There we go. Now I do the nervous shaky rattle, shake and bake.
Ah, okay.
So it's picking up on my,
Gotcha.
my seat dancing.
Gotcha. So, RTX 2070, it's coming October 17th, if you can afford it.
If you can afford the 30% increase.
Yep.
For a 50% increase in price.
Yeah.
That's just not really economically. It's more of future proofing because you're waiting in the future for RTX games, for ray tracing games.
Yep.
It is a very tempting price to me, though. But the other thing about it is, like the 2080 and the 2080 Ti, the AMD coolers are really tall. Those it's. I think
2.5 inch, 3 inch.
I think I've seen 3 slot cards in the triple fan.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's really hot.
Which that's going to run into some case compatibility challenges.
Oh yeah.
Especially if you're trying to fit that in a mini ITX case, because a lot of your mini ITX cases are designed specifically for 2 slot cards and nothing more.
Especially if you want to put it on the side and have the cooler showing through the window.
Yeah, get a riser.
Mm-hmm. That's only a 2 slot.
Unless you go with one of the Thermaltake core cases.
Yeah.
Because then you've got multiple slots there.
Or you do custom.
True.
Yep.
You have to cut out the back side and somehow mount it purely.
Yep. Get out your Dremel.
Yep.
But you know, one thing you won't require a PC for is the Oculus Quest VR headset. There was a big show today, the 5th iteration of the Oculus Connect conference. Or really, it should be the Oculus Connect press demo, for lack of a better word. So this year in Oculus Connect, they debuted the Oculus Quest, which is a $399 premium VR headset with no wires and no PC required.
I've been waiting for this when I heard about the Oculus Go, because people who are talking about the Oculus Go said that the Santa Cruz is coming next, and Santa Cruz has 6 points of tracking versus the Oculus Go has 4 points of tracking in the headset. Like the headset is the tracking versus a IR camera, like the Vive and the Oculus Rift have. So
Right.
this is really cool because this is, you don't like it says, you don't need a phone. It's the Snapdragon is in the headset. I'm hoping that this will last more than 2 hours on battery.
Oh, okay.
The Go only lasts 2 hours on battery. So if
Gotcha.
you're watching 2 episodes of a TV show on VR Netflix or VR YouTube, then you'd have to turn it off and plug it up and charge it. But the cool thing about the difference previously was the 32 gig built-in storage with no micro SD card slot. Unfortunately, it was $200. That's a really good headset that you don't have to have a high-end smartphone. And then the 64 gig version was $250, which is still not bad. And this one is $400, which is, I think it's fine because it has 6 points of tracking, and it also has 2 controllers.
Mm-hmm.
I've been following this because I've been thinking about getting it at some point. Because the Oculus Go only has 1 controller, so you're kind of limited on the immersion of games. You can't do like bow games or I guess boxing, stuff that's on Oculus Rift. With this one, now you can. It's not going to be as graphically awesome as having the Rift or the Vive, but it's still going to be enough, in my opinion, to play games. If they're going to have the same games in the store, in the Oculus store, running on this, it may or may not cut into the price. It may or may not cut into the sales of the Rift. The Rift being better resolution, better quality, better detail.
Sure.
Would make people think, well, I can get a better experience if I buy the Rift, especially at also $400. I think it was 400 or 500.
Well, right, but I guess it comes down to your use case, right? So I'm just looking at this for the first time right now and thinking about it in terms of a use case. And looking at this, there's no wires, so may not be as visually good as the Rift. Just the fact that it has no wires, I believe, is a nice starting point.
Oh yeah.
You know, HTC, we talked about a few weeks ago, debuted a wireless adapter for their Vive headset, which I have a Vive. I've used it a couple of times. It's a good experience as long as you don't trip over the wires.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
The thing that has me curious about this is they mentioned in the PC World article that the tracking, because it's all built into the Oculus Quest visor, or the headset, excuse me, it means that your field of movement with your arms is a little more limited than it is with the Rift or the Vive.
Yeah.
In particular, they mention if you put it behind your back, it will lose track of it.
Right. Right. It's only 6 points, like turn your head, and then that, I believe, from the video I've seen. But if you go back, there's no IR camera, because IR camera's in the front. So there's no IR camera to see behind your back like you're being captured or something.
But of course...
And there's no walking capability in it. There's currently no walking capability with the Rift or the Vive unless you buy the Omni and then integrate it with because the Omni is like it's like the walking gym.
It's the combination trampoline slash treadmill device that basically is an 8-way directional treadmill that you can run on that simulates movement in a VR game.
Right. So that plus a VR, like a high-end VR headset that would be nice to not have cables. You could actually play first-person shooters, or really first-person anything, with more immersion.
Of course, there were a number of questions that they didn't answer in today's Oculus Connect. In particular, they didn't mention anything about resolution of the screens. They didn't talk about battery life.
Yeah.
And most importantly, they didn't talk about platform cross-compatibility.
Those are all good points, actually.
They did not talk about whether Rift titles will be playable on the Quest. And likewise, they did not talk about if Oculus Go titles will be playable on the Quest. I would imagine the Go titles should be.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the Rift titles are going to be the ones that are going to be more questionable in my mind.
Right. Yeah, because if I can play Total Robo Recall on the Quest, that would be awesome. I would definitely love that.
That would be pretty cool.
I've been waiting to play that game.
That would be pretty cool.
Whenever I get an Oculus headset.
Well, if you're looking for new ways to game, your Oculus Quest VR headset may not be the only one you can look into. Microsoft has announced that the Xbox One will be getting mouse and keyboard support in the coming weeks. This one's from Ars Technica. It says developers will be able to choose whether to support keyboard plus mouse controls in their games. But remember, the original claim that the Xbox One would support keyboard and mouse controls was made approximately 27 months ago.
Mm-hmm.
So, but they did announce on Tuesday in a blog post, that would be Tuesday, September the 25th, 2018, for anyone watching this in the future, that mouse and keyboard support will finally be rolling out to Xbox Insider members. And so, in particular, they mentioned one of the games that I've come to really enjoy recently, that is Warframe, as one of the first titles to test mouse and keyboard input on the Xbox One.
Nice.
Now, having played Warframe both with an Xbox One controller and with a PC keyboard on my PC, there are advantages to both. To me, I think the PC controls are more precise, but the Xbox One controls are definitely easier on... They're definitely easier and more centralized on the controller. The ability to do some of the game utilizes a certain kind of parkour movement through the levels, and a lot of that is easier on a controller. I'll give it that. But the actual aiming and shooting is definitely much easier on PC with mouse and keyboard.
So if there's a way to combine the two.
You know, I would be happy if there was.
Yeah. I don't know how that would be, though. Because I played Warframe too. Not as much, but it can be a little difficult on a PC to switch over from, say, aiming to hacking, or doing some of the other actions. Probably
Right.
powers too.
I mean, once you get used to it, there's an almost certain rocking key motion you can learn that allows you to traverse levels very, very quickly. Basically a continuous rocking between the W control and space keys, that once you get the rhythm down, it's actually able to move through the level fairly easily.
Interesting.
But that same motion on a controller is much, much easier.
Mm-hmm.
It's control. It's direction. It's either directional pad, or if you're using a joystick, the joystick direction plus a button.
Gotcha.
And so your mileage may vary. I know most of the time, Bones, when he's playing Warframe, plays with a controller because he thinks the movement works better. And I would tend to agree.
Yeah, I mean, I can see that. Is pushing the joystick. For some games, I have experienced. Actually, I played all consoles. Had a PS4. Have a PS4. Had an Xbox One for a while. Just couldn't really get into only having to use a controller. And now that I don't have the Xbox One anymore, they're having support for keyboard mouse. It's funny. I was waiting on it for a while. I did use an adapter to use a keyboard mouse on the console, but that was alright. It was better than it was good, but it just wasn't the best.
Gotcha.
Because you have to update the BIOS, and you have to update it quite often for all the game compatibility. And just, I agree that the couch and controller, comfortability, however you say that word, is a little bit better than sitting on your couch, propping a portable table with a keyboard mouse on it, or even if you have, at least to me, or even if you have like a tray or something with keyboard mouse on it. If you're doing couch and not doing like I've had before, where my console was on the same table as my monitor and computer, then controller is better, but I couldn't get used to the controller. I'd rather play games with keyboard and mouse, because I played keyboard and mouse games for at least 10 years. And it's so much easier to go over to the person and then shoot versus using your control. I don't know. I played Destiny 1 on both PS4 and on Xbox One. I got to like level 7 on Xbox One, and the way the controller, because with the mouse it's just one thing and click, and with the controller it's 2 joysticks and try to line up the crosshairs perfectly before you're dead, which for me, who can't get used to the controller, was terrible, and I gave up on both consoles because I couldn't do that.
Right.
Yeah. For someone who is used to mouse and keyboard controls, trying to do dual analogs and remembering that you're having to control both analogs at the same time takes some wrapping your head around. Now, I've gotten used to it, and there's some games that I prefer a controller in. Dead Cells, in particular. That game works so much better with a controller.
I mean, I like when I'm playing GTA 5 or GTA Online, whichever one. For the most part, when the character is on foot, it's keyboard and mouse. When the character gets into a vehicle, I switch to a controller, because driving with a controller is a whole lot better than driving with a keyboard and mouse.
Agreed.
Racing games, same thing. So much better with a controller versus keyboard and mouse. Flight games, same as racing games. But when the character is on foot and then going around and doing whatever tasks, to me, it's so much easier to use keyboard and mouse. Other people who've used controller with console for decades, however long when they started, however long they played, they rather play, and they can play more efficient and faster for themselves with a controller than they can with a keyboard and mouse. It really depends on the preference and your playstyle, but I mean, the computer, you can put any input into it and then run a software with profiles and then run it. So that was a big frustration with consoles, is they're limited to one controller instead of, you could give up the whole keyboard and mouse, give an unfair advantage, then integrate it. Allow it.
Yeah.
And then it won't.
Consoles have had USB ports for a while.
And, Microsoft opened up this possibility when they introduced the adaptive controller. Because the whole point of the adaptive controller was to give people who have disabilities or who can't play with a traditional controller the ability to play their games.
Yeah.
If they can take that adaptive controller and basically make customized inputs for people who can't play games traditionally or with traditional controller, then yeah, there's really no reason why they couldn't include keyboard and mouse controls. Or any other kind of controls, really.
And they would get a lot more people to buy their products, because there are games that are on Xbox One that are on PC, but there are games that are only on Xbox One that you cannot get on the exclusives. I would love to play the exclusives, but I hate the controller in first-person shooters. Especially, that's really the only one that I know of that I hate the controller, hate the console controller. So I would love to play Last of Us and Halo, the ones that aren't on PC, like Master Chief Collection, and any of the other console exclusives, but I can't do controller for first-person shooters. It started with trying to do Red Faction. I borrowed Red Faction on PlayStation 4 or PlayStation 2. I think it was 2 back in the day. And by the time I lined up the crosshairs with the 2 joysticks, with like 7 guys in front of me shooting at me, I was dead. Same kind of thing in Destiny. It was also just the trying to walk with the joysticks, shooting with lining up the crosshair with the joystick, even with aim assist on, which I think aim assist on was because it was hard and you could turn it off too. It was hard for certain people to line up the crosshairs with the joysticks or thumbsticks.
Yeah, I kind of ran into the same thing lately. I've been playing through the Tomb Raider games, the 2013 reboot and Rise of the Tomb Raider. on my Xbox One. Mostly because I never bought them on PC, and I was able to get those two games through Xbox Game Pass. The initial levels for me were a struggle because the only weapon you have is a bow, and they're very finicky about their hitboxes in that game.
That's too bad.
I can't tell you those first couple hours I played how many times I have an arrow sail right past a guy's head when I thought I had the dot right on his head. Eventually, I learned to compensate for it with that game. But, pro tip, if you aim for their neck, it counts as a headshot. So, those are typically a lot easier to line up for me for some reason.
Nice.
All right. But enough about consoles. We're here to talk about PC hardware. And in particular, I noticed there were a lot of stories about AMD and AMD being rather silent on most of them, which is curious for them. And so the first couple of stories I wanted to talk about have to do with the possibility that AMD could be launching a new version of their Polaris graphics card in the next couple of weeks. This comes from Tech Radar. So they are saying there is currently a rumor originally based on a forum post on the Chinese tech forum, Chip Hell, and corroborated by a post on the Phoronix forums with an article that I've also linked in the show notes that I'll include in the description about a new Polaris ID being added to the Linux kernel driver for AMD GPUs. The new PCI ID for this Polaris part is 0x6F or 6FDF. And so 0x6FDF is not referenced by any existing Radeon graphics card in any other driver databases. And while it is listed in the Polaris 10 family of GPUs, it should be noted that in the Linux driver, this also includes the Polaris 20 GPUs that made up the RX 500 series, as well as the Polaris 10 GPUs that made up the RX 400 series. So if there is indeed a Polaris 30 being added, it's likely that it would be grouped under the same part of the driver. But unfortunately, we haven't heard anything about what that new GPU is going to be, which is where the speculation from the Chinese forum Chip Hell comes in, which is that they believe that this new offering is a 12 nanometer spin on the current RX 500 series of 14 nanometer cards. So the 12 nanometer process is an iteration of 14 nanometer on a slightly smaller node. And given the difference moving from 14 nanometer to 12 nanometer had on the Ryzen CPUs, we could see up to a 10 to 15% performance gain on what everyone is assuming is going to be probably an RX 600 series card.
Not bad.
So 10 to 15% in performance. I run RX 480s in my system, a pair of them in Crossfire. Mostly because at the time I had one, I purchased a second one. I couldn't afford Vega 56, and it was never available to purchase anyway.
Which is fantastic car, by the way, Mr. Ned.
Nope, not salty at all. Not at all.
$384.
And so, a 10 to 15% performance improvement on the RX 580. That would take it from being roughly in GTX 1060 territory and push it up to the low end of GTX 1070 range.
I would agree to that. I mean, with driver updates, it's technically slightly faster than the 1060 more often than not.
This is true.
Especially at 1440p.
Right, where the 8 gigabyte frame buffer on the RX 480 580 gives it that little extra bit of legs.
And computationally, it is a much stronger chip, GPU. So I think AMD is finally realizing the magical ingredients that make that GPU up with its drivers. So it's been kind of nice.
If the speculation from the Chinese forum is correct, we could see these new RX 600 series cards as early as the first week of October, which is next week.
Cool.
So, honestly, at this point, I wouldn't mind a refreshed Polaris card. You know, I like my RX 480s. I've actually looked at seeing about getting water blocks for them.
Mm-hmm.
Because I want to see how much more performance could be got out of them if they were overclocked a little more.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
But at the same time, it would also mean that I would need to expand my current water cooling setup. Which right now, I'm only water cooling my CPU. And so I'd have to consider, would I need an additional radiator? How much extra tubing am I going to need? What fittings to use?
You have soft tubing or hard?
It is soft tubing. It's I'm using the SwiftTech H220X kit, which is a 240 millimeter radiator with a built-in reservoir and pump.
Yeah.
With soft tubing to one of SwiftTech's, what did they call that block? I don't remember. Not Heat Killer. That's what OCZ used to call theirs. I'd have to look it up. But anyway, it's been real solid for me with my 1800X. I've been able to run it all the way up to 4 gigahertz. I've got it running at 3.9 right now because 4 gigahertz wasn't fully stable for me. So I did not win the Silicon Lottery, unfortunately.
It's all good. It's still a very, very solid clock speed for Ryzen.
Oh, speaking of the Silicon Lottery, you want to hear something pretty awesome?
Yep.
The Silicon Lottery. You charge a little bit extra, but you get the best bend, guaranteed best bend CPUs.
I've heard about them. I was trying to remember. Adored TV did an analysis of some of their work in the past. You do pay significantly more for their CPUs, but they basically do all the work for you and make sure that you get a CPU that will hit a particular clock speed.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, they, in particular, he was looking at the 8700K, but they basically buy lots of these CPUs, then run them through testing, and however they fall in the testing, they bin them into various tiers based on the highest clock speed they achieve in their testing.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
Yeah, it's either 1.5 to 2 a CPU cost, but I mean it's the best bin CPU out there. So
This is true.
So it might be worth the price if people want to either the 5.3 gigahertz clock, A7 8086K, which
Right.
is either Jay's 2 cents or Linus, who talked about it recently. Or it might also been Greg from Science Studio. I saw one of those videos that they were talking about it.
Yeah, the 8086K is basically an 8700K that's been binned from the factory to be guaranteed to hit 5 gigahertz. All right, let's see.
Going back to what you're probably, if you're doing your GPUs, you know, what I heard on from Jay's 2 cents, and King is what I would call him. He says a 120 radiator per component that you want to cool. So if you do both of your, if you can get 2 water blocks for your 480s, then you get a either a 240, or you can go up to, if you want to do overclocking on them, then you need to get another, and you get a 360 if you can fit it in your case. Or I'd probably say 240 and a 120 separately, and then just run the tubes through all of them.
Sounds like a good idea to me.
Yeah, definitely.
Let's see. So we also have more AMD GPU news. This is yet another leak from the Phoronix forums. For those not familiar, Phoronix is a largely Linux-focused forum, but they do a lot of updates on graphics, display drivers, and a lot of testing of hardware when it comes to Linux performance. This particular leak, though, was when one of their liaisons from AMD used the name Arcturus in reference to a future GPU. As it turns out, this supposedly is the name of the GPU that is supposed to succeed Navi. Now, the said rep was very quick to delete his post with that code name in it, although he did later confirm that it is a code name they use. He would not confirm that it is indeed the GPU that is supposed to follow Navi. But given the context he used it in his original post, that's what we were led to believe.
Interesting.
And so this is what Phoronix had to say in their article about it. It now looks like the AMD Navi successor might be Arcturus. Arcturus is a large red star and the brightest in the constellation of Bootes. Yes, that is the correct name to pronounce. Correct way to pronounce that particular constellation. Ootes. We found out about the Arcturus name today in our forums from our resident AMD Linux liaison when a reader was asking about all the numbers involved with modern AMD GPU codenames, such as Vega 10, 11, and 20, and a preference for going back to GPU codenames like the days of the Northern and Southern Islands, like with Hawaii, Fiji, Tahiti, and etc.
Interesting.
So Arcturus is expected to be the first codename under this revised naming scheme, while still tying into the solar nameplay. There's been a lot of talk in the past about other GPUs in this potential series. There was a rumor a while back that the successor to Navi was going to be Cirrus after the Dog Star. But it's looking like Arcturus may be more correct. And in particular, it looks like Arcturus is going to be appearing in the open source Linux driver. So we should be seeing new code names sooner in the open source driver because they want to go ahead and have those code names in there so that when the actual GPUs come out, all they have to do is go in and change an ID string.
You know,
So,
it's interesting. So not to take away from that statement, that's interesting. But I think what's even more interesting is the fact that toward the end of the article, they say it's great to hear some news from the AMD graphics side too, which has been silent for several months. So that statement right there is extremely interesting because they have been silent. I think they learned from the Vega launch when they overhyped everything and they couldn't deliver quite as much as they said they would on performance. Now they're being super quiet. And NVIDIA is kind of eating itself with its RTX launch.
right.
So,
And to be honest, you know, having a fresh Polaris out there would be a nice shot in the arm to AMD for now.
it would.
Yeah, it's not going to fight the RTX 20 series, but at the very least, AMD could be saying, yes, we are still competing. Yes, we do still have GPUs out here. And, you know, hey, have you heard about Navi?
Right. Well, it'll probably consume as much as current Polaris, if not slightly less. Slightly. But, you know, be what, 10 to 15% faster, I think that article stated. So it'll be nice to see a new part. I mean, it's not going to be trend setting or anything, but it'll be a solid part. I'm sure it'll be priced pretty well.
And if there is going to be a new Polaris GPU, then, you know, that'll give us some extra data to work with, and it'll be a solid mid-range part, I think. You know,
Yep.
If it hadn't been for the fact that they were basically all bought up by miners during the mining craze, the RX 580 and the 480 before it are excellent mid-range cards that are solid, are rock solid 1080p gaming cards and are entry-level 1440p gaming cards.
I bet they're smoother overall. I bet you they're smoother experience overall than the 1060. I'm not taking anything away from the 1060. I have one, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it for 2 years plus. But I bet you it's a smoother experience overall.
Depends on the games.
True.
The API, like Vulkan, RTX or RX does better in Vulkan because it's built for Vulkan. I mean, built for AMD. I think the X12, the RX cards work well on. The GTX doesn't, but GTX cards work better, perform better than RX on DX11 games. And then, of course, the opposite's true. Like I said, with RX, RX works better with, or better than GTX 1060 on DX 12
11.
games. Well, RX is better with DX12 and Vulkan games.
Right.
GX, or I felt like the 580 is better than the 1060 on DX12 games and Vulkan games.
That's changed quite a bit though with the driver maturity that they've had on Pascal and the Radeon parts.
Yeah,
So the DirectX 11 performance has gotten marginally better on the Radeon parts, and then the DirectX 12 / Vulkan API performance has increased slightly on the Pascal parts. So,
but still, games like the Singularity and Hitman, I mean, those are pretty much AMD built games.
yeah.
They do better with RX cards than GTX cards. So those, for example, Doom in Vulkan works better on an RX 580 than it does on GTX. 1060 from the very
Yeah, but I think Doom works just about well on anything, honestly. That game doesn't care. It's so well optimized. But I have to say, I completely agree with you. You're completely right. But just from a pure user experience, I played GTA 5 on a Ryzen 2700X with a Vega part versus a 2600X and a 1070 Ti. The 1070 Ti gets better performance. Like, it's on average probably 20 to 40 frames per second faster than the Vega, but the Vega just feels smoother. It's hard to explain. I don't know if that's because the base frames are higher or the frame time response is faster on the Vega, but the Vega just feels slightly smoother versus the 1070 Ti. But there are places in the game where the 1070 Ti is noticeable.
The two things that three, I would say that the other tech YouTubers, the people who actually benchmark the video cards and games, versus, well, those people. For me, I would say as long as a card gets at least 60 frames per second, it's good for me.
Mm-hmm.
Also, they don't really tell the viewers, yes, this card is better in these games, this card is better in these games, but you have to look at, I think maybe Greg or Science Studio or maybe one other person has ever said, this component is better, but you have to take in consideration the whole build piece, understand, like, with either graphics view, or I would make the whole build cost. Like, the game.
I'm sorry, Hunter. I don't mean to interrupt, but I'm only catching about every other word. I don't know if it's your connection or what's going on, but I know your image has been frozen for about the last 10 seconds on my screen, and I'm only catching about every other word.
Yeah. But when is it better now?
Well, I can at least hear you now.
Alright. So, wish people wish or whoever would say this part is better in games compared, but it's the overall build. That's really the thing that people say. The 87K is better in games than the 2700, but at a premium cost of the whole bit.
Yeah, and unless you're doing 144 frame type gaming, it's not. I don't think it's that noticeable, right?
But even like, well, what I'm saying, overall build, considering what parts to buy, whatever.
Honor, I'm sorry, you're breaking up. I can't hear you.
Okay.
Yeah. I think we might have lost him completely.
Oh, that sucks.
Well, I guess moving on. So, obviously, AMD has some exciting stuff to look at for GPUs in the near future. One thing I didn't expect is apparently some of the investors are looking at AMD specifically, thinking that they will increase their market share in the CPU market to capture up to 30% of the CPU market by the end of this year. This comes from a report from DigiTimes. They have sources who say AMD CPU market share is set to jump from its current 20% to over 30% by Q4 2018. The last time AMD had a large slice of the market that large was in Q4 of 2007.
So what part? Oh my gosh, man! What parts were out in 2007? Phenom? Was it Phenom or Phenom
yeah,
2?
that would actually no. That would have been before Phenom. That would have been the time of like the
64X2 and the 64
probably like the FX57 or FX60 era.
Oh my gosh! Wow.
Or hold on, let me check real quick.
Well, I want to say weren't FX57 and 60 out slightly before Core 2? So 2007, I want to say that was primarily Core 2 era, and around then, the Athlon 64s were transitioned into the Phenom or Phenom 2 product stack.
Okay, so the Athlon 64 FXs.
Okay.
The last of those, based on the Windsor cores, were launched in the first half of 2006. So for Q4 2007, okay, Q4 2007 is when the first generation of the Phenoms were launched. So you were right. So Phenom FX was launched last quarter of 2007, first quarter of 2008.
Okay.
So yeah, the Phenom X4s were the first that were launched during that time period. In particular, the Phenom X4 9000 series.
Oh, wow. I didn't know they had that much market share back then.
Yeah, that was 31.8% at that time period.
Well, to put it in perspective, when Ryzen 1 first launched, there were several SKUs in the top 5 pretty much month after month after month on Amazon. So I want to say those parts were the 1600, the 7. I don't know if it was any of the Ryzen 7s, maybe the 1700, but definitely the 1600 was like, and I know they had several parts that were in the top 5, top 10 constantly. And Ryzen 2000, Ryzen 2000 has had the 2700X and the 2600X very much in the top 5 since they came out. The 2000s are just selling like hotcakes, and it's kind of crazy because they've only got essentially 4 in that product stack.
So I'm looking at Amazon right now. The best sellers in computer CPUs processors.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, number 1 is held by the Ryzen 7 2700.
Nice.
Number 2 is the Core i7 8700K.
Okay.
Number 3 is the Ryzen 5 2600. Number 4 is the i7 8700 non-K. And number 5 is the Ryzen 7 2700X.
Nice.
Let's see. Also in the top 10, at number 8, the Ryzen 3 2200G. And at number 10, the Ryzen 5 1600.
So the 1600 is still selling really well.
Excuse me, 1600 is selling at number 9 for $149.99.
Gotcha.
And that is a heck of a deal.
Yep.
6 cores, 12 threads for $150. I'll take that all day long.
Yeah. I'm surprised the 2600X isn't in that lineup.
So the 2600 non-X is currently $165.99.
Yeah.
It's at number 3. The 2600X. Wow, 2600X is way down the stack.
Surprises me.
The 2600X.
Is it priced at $220 though?
Let's see, 2600X. Oh goodness. It is all the way down at Oh, I'm not even seeing it in the top 100.
Oh my gosh.
The 2600 is outselling it so hard.
That's impressive.
No, wait, here we go. I'm sorry. I missed it earlier. I thought it said 1700X because it had the 1700. But the 1700 is selling at 14th. The 2600X is selling at 15th.
Okay. It's not bad. I would have expected it to be higher, but still top 20. Not bad. So considering the fact that Ryzen parts have been on the top seller list for so long since they initially debuted at first gen, they are clawing back. They're clawing back a decent amount of the market share in the desktop space.
I do feel obligated to point out, though, at number 11 is the FX 8350.
I love your face. I can't believe people are still buying that thing.
Well, I mean, right now it's $88.
Is it really?
Yeah, the FX 8350 is $88 right now.
Oh my gosh. I was playing in a clan not too long ago, before I got to CFG. The guy paired an 8350 with a 1080 Ti, and he was bragging about it. He was like, I've got 8 cores, man. They're 4 gigahertz. I've got my 1080 Ti.
Oh,
yeah,
goodness.
You're bottlenecking that card so hard, man.
Yeah.
I can see people getting 8350 because if they only have an AM3 Plus motherboard and DDR3 RAM, why not do cheaper and just get a CPU versus getting a whole new motherboard, RAM, and everything?
I mean, that's fair.
Yeah, but the only reason you're going AM3 is because you've got an FX something.
Yeah.
I don't think they made any APUs on the AM3 socket.
No, they
No.
made all those
It's
generation
FM2.
CPUs on the FM2.
Yeah.
Or actually, this is so.
Yeah, but that's DDR2.
Or,
right?
No, AM2 was DDR2. FM2 was DDR3.
Oh, okay.
I actually still have an A8 3870K, which was on the FM1 socket, which they only used for one generation. I will say, those early Lalano APUs are far better than they were ever given credit for. You were basically getting a Phenom 2 X4 945 with a built-in Radeon HD 6550.
Not bad.
Yeah.
It would handle most games I threw at it at 720p 30 FPS when you paired it with good DDR3 RAM.
Mm-hmm.
I had a I had a pretty nice G-Skill kit that was DDR3 2400.
Okay.
Paired with that, that thing would do pretty well. Admittedly, I didn't keep that kit in that system. That kit moved around in a whole bunch of my systems. But even when I had an 8 gig Corsair DDR3 1600 kit in there, it was no slouch. When I overclocked that memory kit to 1866, that built-in GPU saw a significant increase in frame rate. Past that, 2133, you got a little bit extra, but it was like the difference of maybe a frame.
Mm-hmm.
And past that, you basically didn't see any performance increase. But going from 1600 megahertz to 1866, you saw an easy 5 to 7% jump in frame rates.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
I need to get that system out sometime and see how it does how it would do at probably not 1080p, but at 720p in modern esports games like CSGO or Dota 2 or maybe if I'm feeling particularly brave, I might even try Fortnite.
Well, do you have you still have that RAM kit?
Yes, actually, I do. I had to check and see what system it's in, but yeah, it was a G-Skill. It was a G-Skill Ripjaws X DDR3 2400 kit.
Nice.
On AM.
I'm sorry, Hunter. You're really cutting in and out.
Yeah. I feel bad.
Yeah, I know he'd mentioned his roommate was doing something with Netflix, and that could be really putting the hurt on his bandwidth.
Okay, no streaming between 8 and 10.
Well,
Stat.
yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
That's better.
So the two CPUs, two AMD CPUs, I remember. The funny one is the tri-core, which is a quad core with a disabled core.
Yes.
That was funny. And then the other one, which I had, and I was planning to overclock to see how much I can do, is the Phenom 2965.
It was a good CPU.
That was a good CPU for its day.
Yeah, it was. And then a friend needed it for a server box.
Okay.
He wired his house with Cat 5e, I think, or Cat 6. Awesome. He's a network guy. So he wired his whole house with, like every room had a network port.
Nice.
Bit jealous?
The way to go. Oh yeah, I'm jealous too.
That's a lot of work.
Yeah.
I can appreciate that.
Network minded. Oh yeah, he's really network minded, and he had a server in a closet, and all in a 16. I think no, actually, he had a 24 port switch in the closet. So yeah, I gave that to that CPU that I was planning to overclock to see how far I can push it. I'm not sure if I was going to do air cool or water cool on it, but you can do water cool on an AM3 or an AM3 Plus because there's blocks for it.
Oh, all the AIOs support it.
Yeah, you can also do it that way. I know before I upgraded to Ryzen, my daily driver PC, I had faster ones, but my daily driver was a Phenom 2 X6 1055T.
Oh yeah, I remember those. I
So
remember those.
uh,
Because
the
they're
only reason
faster than the bulldozers.
yeah. By the way, the 1055T with its 2.8 gigahertz base clock, uh, overclocking it is a bit of a crapshoot because I've pushed it as high as 3.6 gigahertz before.
Which that's pretty
But
good.
but the fastest I ever overclocked it and left it was 3.2 because stability with that chip gets weird above 3.2 gigahertz. I don't know why, but I know some people with their 1055Ts were able to push it up to about 4 gigahertz. I pushed it to 3.6, was generally happy with the performance, but was not happy with the thermals I was getting.
That was a hot chip. I remember that thing. It was a good chip. Very hot.
Part of it was that I was using kind of a budget motherboard. I was
Okay.
using a Gigabyte 880G board,
Hmm.
which was kind of their mid-range board for the period.
I remember.
Was going to upgrade to an 890G board that I'd gotten in a swap, and then I had a friend of mine have his PC die, and basically I used that motherboard to upgrade his system. Considering before he had basically been using the equivalent of a Celeron D, this was a huge step up for him.
Okay.
And so, in fact, he's still using that system with a Phenom 2X4 945, I believe.
Interesting. Well, if it suits his use case, it is.
I mean, it was a solid system at the time. It was above average. Quad core, 8 gigs of RAM, GTX 460.
Yeah, it's a solid system. Man, 880G. So I haven't heard that chipset in a long time. I had the 8 or 900 series chipset that was the upgrade from that had the integrated graphics.
Oh yeah,
And,
the 970.
I don't remember it. It had integrated graphics and it was pretty decent.
I bet it was the 970 then, because the 990FX was the high-end upgrade from the 890GX.
No, it was a GX series. It was a GX chipset because it had integrated graphics on the board. And I had a Phenom 2X3 720 on it, 720BE.
Did you use the core unlocker to turn it into a quad core?
I tried, but then the fourth core was never stable. I always had issues with it, so I just left it. It wasn't bad. It got me through, and then getting the FX 8320 was a huge upgrade. Huge.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
I mean, part of the reason I never went with the FX series was because I had that Phenom 2X6, and it was faster than the first generation bulldozers.
Yep.
Now, technically, the FX 8350 is faster, and faster than my Phenom 2X6. And there were a couple of times I did consider upgrading, but, things happened. I would have the money, then I wouldn't, due to, life.
Yeah.
And so, finally, it got to the point, a couple of years after that, for my workstation, I lucked into a used parts deal where I got the 2400 megahertz RAM kit with a EVGA X79 board and a Core i7 3820.
Nice.
And so even though I still use the Phenom 2X6 for my daily driver, when I needed to do serious work, I went to that PC.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
So I actually probably have that board somewhere in storage. I need to get out and see if that... Because I could get a... We're way off topic here, but this just reminded me. I could get a Xeon E5 2670 for dirt cheap off eBay, and that would upgrade it to 8 cores, 16 threads with 16 gigs of DDR3.
Yeah.
I could drop something like, one of my RX 480s in there and still be a solid system.
Sounds like it. 8 cores.
The only thing about the Xeon E5s was during that time period when they first started locking down the Xeons, so you couldn't overclock them. But if I remember right, the 2670s, they ran at 2.8 gigahertz base and would turbo up to 3.4. So it wouldn't be exactly super slow.
That'd be pretty nice, actually. Especially for thread-heavy workloads. Probably not as good as the Ryzen, but still. Pretty nice.
No. Uh-oh, we have 2 hunters.
He's duplicated himself!
Yeah, it looks like his lag is doing some very weird things.
That's fantastic. I can click. There's 2 hunters in my Hangouts. I'm going back and forth. My mouse cursor says there's a hunter, then there's a hunter, then there's a hunter, and then there's a hunter.
There's 2 or 3.
Oh, goodness. All right. Well, that pretty much covers everything we had. Hunter, any last thoughts, assuming your connection cooperates?
Other than Wi-Fi only for anything is a bad... even when data.
Agreed.
But some can't do because pets will chew up the cables, and you can't route cables.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Last time my parents came up to see me at my apartment, my mom actually got a little mad at me because I have an Ethernet cable running from my switch here in my bedroom all the way out to the living area that connects up to my Xbox One, and then another one that connects to my living room PC.
Mm-hmm.
And so what she did, she went and dug a spare floor mat that I had in the closet, threw the floor mat over the cables and said, at least that way no one will trip over them.
That's hilarious. That's hilarious. I kind of do something similar, except I've got my router and cable modem sitting side by side out in the living room, and then that's sitting right next to my TV stand. And then I run one Ethernet cable to the PS4, and then I run another Ethernet cable through the house into the Ryzen 7 system.
Right.
And I've got it running along the wall, but and then I've got it kind of draped into the utility room, which connects onto my kitchen, but technically I do have it running along the floor. That's kind of funny. But I don't care. People have commented on it. I'm just like, yeah, well, I've got Ethernet running to my PC, so yeah.
You do what you gotta do.
Exactly.
Exactly.
All right. Well, There were some hardware deals that I wanted to feature, but after I looked at them, I realized they were Amazon deals of the day. And so by the time our audience would see this video, those deals would be gone.
Oh,
So,
Yeah.
but I am seriously looking at one of them because it is a Acer 27-inch 1080p monitor for $200. And it is FreeSync enabled and is 144 hertz.
Oh, you've been looking for one of those.
Exactly.
Nice. Somebody's getting ready for Navi.
Indeed. Although I'm torn whether I want to wait a little longer and get a 1440p monitor or get 1080p high refresh rate.
Well, I mean, Monday is. Yeah. So you can wait till then.
What's happening Monday?
Cyber Monday and Black Friday are only 2 months away.
Oh, there you go. Yep,
For,
it's true.
for lots of tech deals, or supposedly.
Yeah, that's the only other thing I'm thinking about is, you know, Black Friday, Cyber Monday is not that far off. And
yeah,
that's the one thing I keep thinking about restraining me from just going ahead and buying this one. Even though, I mean, it looks solid. It's 27 inches, it's 1080p, it's 144 hertz, it's FreeSync enabled, FreeSync 2 enabled.
True.
So, but anyway, ladies and gentlemen, you're not here to listen to that. I'd like to thank you for putting up with our ramblings this week once again as we talk tech. Join us next week as we continue to discuss all the latest tech news that is fit to discuss. I've been Dynamo Ned. This has been TechForge. And remember, when life has you down, Jesus loves you, and forge on.
yep.
Fantastic, Mr. Ned. Fantastic.